And we welcome you back to Big Board Sports, the morning after the Hall of Fame, announcing 3 new members into their class will be inducted in July in Cooperstown, and no better person to react to that than Tim Kirkjian from ESPN, who joins us here this morning on Big Board Sports. And Tim, before we get into the names who didn't get in, and I want to get into the Bonds and Clemens because they're gaining. They are coming on like gangbusters here. They're over 50% for both. Let's talk about the 3 that did get in and your thoughts there.
Well, it's an exceptional group that's going in. I think you can make the case that Jeff Bagwell is one of the 5 greatest first basemen of all time. And I'm still amazed it took him 7 years to get in the Hall of Fame. Tim Raines is one of the great leadoff hitters ever. He wasn't Rickey Henderson, but he was the closest thing to it. And he reached base more times than Tony Gwynn. And when you look at runs scored, hits, and stolen bases, there are only 3 other guys that can match Tim Raines in those categories with his numbers. And then Pudge Rodriguez, of course, is one of the great catchers of all time. His longevity at that position, his defense at that position were enough to get him in the Hall of Fame, and yet he still has the most RBIs and the most hits of any player whose primary position was catcher. So a great first baseman, a great left fielder, and a great catcher went in the Hall of Fame all at the same time, and that's a pretty good day.
Tim, let's talk about the guys who didn't get in, and I know the 3 who did get in are deserving. I'm a little surprised that Rodriguez got in on the first ballot because he's part of that whole steroid thing. But how about Clemens and Bonds? I personally think that they will eventually get in, and they're trending that way at both those guys at over 50%. Did all the conversation about who didn't get in, does it take away at all from the 3 who just were announced are getting in?
Yeah, I find it unfortunate that we're always talking about something other than the guys who actually go in. And that's what yesterday was about, the guys who went in, not the guys who didn't go in. But there is, I understand, a story developing here, and perhaps a softening by the voters on guys with connections to PEDs. I mean, Pudge Rodriguez and Mike Piazza and Jeff Bagwell all have suspicions about them, and now 3 of them are in. So you have to think that this is going to bode well eventually for Roger Clemens and Barry Bonds. And, they got a pretty good spike yesterday, not as big as I think some people thought it would be. But they're in the mid-50s or close to it now with 5 years to go. So I think this is another sign that if the softening continues, Bonds and Clemens could get into the Hall of Fame in their 10 years on the writer's ballot.
We're talking with Tim Kirkjian, ESPN baseball analyst here this morning on Big Board Sports, and we appreciate Tim for a few minutes on the Baseball Hall of Fame and the big announcement coming out yesterday. Tim, we debated on this show, Zach and I, about Clemens and Bonds and whether or not they're deserving in the steroid era, and I was leaning towards putting them in because it's alleged, it's suspected it was before the drug testing really started, before there was any policies in there. But there was one guy I said I would have a real hard time putting in the Hall of Fame no matter what, and that is Alex Rodriguez, the former Yankee. What's your thoughts on A-Rod and if he will ever even sniff getting into the Hall of Fame?
Well, we might, but he's in the category, at least for me, that Manny Ramirez is in that his violations, took place after there was testing. He got suspended after everybody was watching, and that's a big deal. Manny only got 24% of the vote yesterday, and he was the 3rd best player, at least for me, on the ballot after Bonds and Clemens. That's pretty high praise given who was on that ballot, but that's how great Manny Ramirez was. So we'll see if that softening extends to those whose violations occurred after there was testing. I think it's going to be a harder road for Manny and for Alex Rodriguez than it is for Bonds and Clemens, and their road has been pretty hard so far. So we talk about a softening. There's still a hard-line group out there that is going to say, hey, they were testing with you, and you failed tests, so we're putting you in a different category.
So you do draw a clear distinction of both used, but one used after a benchmark in baseball where it officially became, you were officially guilty per se.
Yeah, I make a differentiation there. However, I'm going to study this again next year. I'm going to look at this again next year. And, there's a growing faction of voters who just say, look, I don't care who did what. This is the steroid era, and people that used or didn't use, I'm not going to worry about that. I'm going to vote for the 10 best players. So maybe that begins to really take hold over the next few years. But every year now, I'm going to look at Manny Ramirez and I'll look at Alex Rodriguez when it's time, and I'll determine, I could change my mind on those things. It's a really still a work in progress because of so few, solid answers we have on things.
Tim, hey, one more for me, Tim, and I'll let you go. I know, busy morning, and a lot of people ask you to react to what took place yesterday, but there's one name that is on this list that is trending in the wrong direction, and in my opinion, trending for the wrong reason in the wrong direction. That's Curt Schilling. I think he has the numbers to be in the Hall of Fame, but it's the off-the-field, what he says, the politics. He says crazy stuff that gets out there, and I think that has jaded some of the writers a little bit in their opinion of Curt Schilling, especially when you compare him to Mike Mussina, who I think will get in, and their numbers are awfully similar. What's your thoughts on Curt Schilling getting into the Hall of Fame and maybe reasons why he will not?
Yeah, well, first off, I think Mussina is a slightly better Hall of Fame choice than Schilling is. So to me, that's why he's moved up, is I think he's got a better case than Schilling. Now, I voted for both of them, and I'm not going to hold it against somebody for something that he says basically 10 years after he stopped playing. I'm voting on him as a major league player, and he didn't do any of this while he was a player. But I can tell you, when the ballot is this packed with guys with Hall of Fame numbers, and you're, say, the 8th, 9th, 10th guy on somebody's ballot, like Schilling is, when push comes to shove and a voter has to say, well, somebody's got to go, and Curt Schilling or anybody else does something that says, hey, give me a reason to take him off, some people do that. Now, I don't do that. I voted for Curt Schilling again this year, and I'll vote for him next year also. But the voters are voters. They have the right to do whatever they want. You just shouldn't give a voter any reason not to vote for you, and apparently that has happened in some cases with Curt Schilling.
Hey, Tim, you're the best, man. I appreciate a few minutes. I know our listeners here in Albany do as well, and we'll get back in touch. I know spring training is right around the corner, and we'd love for you to join us throughout the course of the season coming up. But we'll be back in touch, Tim. Thanks again for a few minutes here on Big Board Sports.
My pleasure. Thank you.